A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, Part 5. For youth, here was my soup. Dinner was being served in the great dining hall. Far from being spring, it was in fact an evening in October. Nobody was assembled in the big dining room. Dinner was ready. Here was the soup. It was a plain gravy soup. There was nothing to stir the fancy in that. One could have seen through the transparent liquid any pattern that there might have been on the plate itself. But there was no pattern. The plate was plain. Next came beef with its attendant greens and potatoes. A homely trinity suggesting the rumps of cattle in a muddy market and sprouts curled and yellowed at the edge, and bargaining and cheapening and women with string bags on Monday morning. There was no reason to complain of human nature's daily food, seeing that the supply was sufficient and coal miners doubtless were sitting down to less. Prunes and custard followed, and if anyone complains that prunes, even when mitigated by custard, are an uncharitable vegetable fruit, they are not, stringy as a miser's heart, and exuding a fluid such as might run in misers' veins who have denied themselves wine and warmth for 80 years, and yet not given to the poor, he should reflect that there are people whose charity embraces even the prune. Biscuits and cheese came next, and here the water jug was liberally passed round. For it is the nature of biscuits to be dry, and these were biscuits to the core. That was all. The meal was over. Everybody scraped their chairs back. The swing doors swung violently to and fro. Soon the hall was emptied of every sign of food and made ready, no doubt, for breakfast next morning. Down corridors and up staircases the youth of England went, banging and singing. And was it for a guest, a stranger? For I had no more right here in Fernham than in Trinity or Somerville or Girton or Newnham or Christchurch, to say the dinner was not good, or to say we are now Mary Seaton and I in her sitting room. Could we not have dined up here alone? For if I had said anything of the kind, I should have been prying and searching into the secret economies of a house which to the stranger wears so fine a front of gaiety and courage. No, one could say nothing of the sort. Indeed, conversation for a moment flagged. The human frame being what it is, heart, body and brain all mixed together, are not contained in separate compartments, as they will be no doubt in another million years. A good dinner is of great importance to good talk. One cannot think well, love well, sleep well, if one has not dined well. The lamp in the spine does not light on beef and prunes. We are all probably going to heaven, and Vandyke is, we hope, to meet us round the next corner. That is the dubious and qualifying state of mind that beef and prunes at the end of the day's work breed between them. Happily, my friend who taught science had a cupboard where there was a squat bottle and little glasses. But there should have been sole and partridge to begin with, so that we were able to draw up to the fire and repair some of the damages of the day's living. In a minute or so we were slipping freely in and out among all those objects of curiosity and interest which form in the mind in the absence of a particular person, and are naturally to be discussed on coming together again. How somebody was married, another has not. One thinks this, another that. One has improved out of all knowledge, the other most amazingly gone to the bad. With all those speculations upon human nature and the character of the amazing world we live in, which spring naturally from such beginnings. While these things were being said, however, I became shamefacedly aware of a current setting in of its own accord and carrying everything forward to an end of its own. One might be talking of Spain or Portugal, a book or race course, but the real interest of whatever was said was none of these things, but a scene of masons on a high roof some 5 centuries ago. Kings and nobles brought treasure in huge sacks and poured it under the earth. This scene was forever coming alive in my mind and placing itself by another of lean cows and a muddy market and withered greens and the stringy hearts of old men. These 2 pictures, disjointed and disconnected and nonsensical as they were forever coming together and combating each other and had me entirely at their mercy. The best course, unless the whole talk was to be distorted, was to expose what is in my mind to the air, when with this good luck it would fade and crumble like the head of the dead king when they opened the coffin at Windsor. Briefly, then, I told Miss Seaton about the masons who had been all those years on the roof of the chapel, and about the kings and queens and nobles bearing sacks of gold and silver on their shoulders which they shovelled into the earth, and then how the great financial magnates of our own time came and laid cheques and bonds, I suppose where the others had laid ingots and rough lumps of gold. All that lies beneath the college is down here, I said, but this college, where we are now sitting, what lies beneath its gallant red brick and the wild unkempt grasses of the garden? What force is behind that plain china off which we dined? And here it popped out of my mouth before I could stop it, the beef, the custard, and the prunes. Well, said Mary Seaton, about the year 1860. Oh, but you know the story, she said, bored, I suppose, by the recital. And she told me rooms were hired, committees met, envelopes were addressed, circulars were drawn up, meetings were held, letters were read out. So and so has promised so much. On the contrary, Mr. won't give a penny. The Saturday Review has been very rude. How can we raise a fund to pay for offices? Shall we hold a bazaar? Can we find a pretty girl to sit in the front row? Let us look up what John Stuart Mill said on the subject. Can anyone persuade the editor of the to print a letter? Can we get Lady to sign it? Lady is out of town. That was the way it was done, presumably 60 years ago. And it was a prodigious effort, and a great deal of time was spent on it. And it was only after a long struggle, and with the utmost difficulty, that they got £30,000 together. So obviously we cannot have wine and partridges, and servants carrying tin dishes on their heads, she said. We cannot have sofas and separate rooms. The amenities, she said, quoting from some book or other, will have to wait. At the thought of all these women working year after year and finding it hard to get £2,000 together, and as much as they could do to get £30,000, we burst out in scorn at the reprehensible poverty of our sex. What had our mothers been doing then that they had no wealth to leave us? Powdering their noses, looking in at shop windows, flaunting in the sun at Monte Carlo. There were some photographs on the mantelpiece. Mary's mother, if that was her picture, may have been a wastrel in her spare time. She had 13 children by a minister of the church. But if so, her gay and dissipated life had left too few traces of its pleasures on her face. She was a homely body, an old lady in a plaid shawl, which was fastened by a large cameo, and she sat in a basket chair, encouraging a spaniel to look at the camera with the amused yet strange expression of one who is sure that the dog will move directly the bulb is pressed. Now, if she had gone into business, had become a manufacturer of artificial silk, or a magnate on the stock exchange, if she had left £2,000 or £3,000 to Fernham, we could have been sitting at our ease tonight, and the subject of our talk might have been archaeology, botany, anthropology, physics, the nature of the atom, mathematics, astronomy, relativity, geography. End of part 5.